I haven't thought of anything witty to say at the start.
Have you not? Have you ever thought of anything witty to say at the start?
Burn.
Burn.
Was that a burn? No, right.
Nice.
Okay, yeah.
Just want to let you know.
Okay. I'll just blag it. You ready?
Well, we're sitting in silence, so I guess so.
Matt, do you need to scratch?
The least important, interesting podcast ever. We just sit there in total silence for like 5 minutes.
Okay, listeners, welcome to episode 38 of the Picky Bastards podcast, where for once I'm going to not say anything witty and imaginative and slag the other two off at the start because we have a lot to get through. So I'm just going to go straight through after saying a quick hello. How you doing, Nick? How you doing,
Doing
Matt?
all right, thank you. How are you?
Hello.
Again,
That
with
was
a
an
weird,
interesting
A lot
voice.
longer.
Yeah.
weird introduction
And also
from Matt, as
happy
usual.
2021. We're currently recording on the 10th of January and nothing out of the ordinary has happened yet in 2021. It's been very calm and normal.
It has.
Very smooth.
Yeah, no weird shit going on. So today we're going to look back at some of the albums of 2020. So we've all picked our own album of the year, which you'll hear soon. But we've also, as always, picked some from other lists and from other magazines and websites. So I'll just run through what they are. So we've got Shore by Fleet Foxes, which was on a lot of lists, but was number 2 in Uncut magazine, was its highest. We've got England as a Garden by Cornershop, which was number 6 in Mojo magazine. Chloe and Halle's Ungodly Hour was on a lot of lists, but was number 1 in Clash magazine. Folklore by Taylor Swift was number 1 in 8 different lists, so pretty popular. We've got Open Mike Eagle's Anime, Trauma and Divorce, which was number 1 in beats per minute. And Poppy's I Disagree, which is the one that maybe I'm not sure we should have included, seems its highest was number 12 on Revolver, but
it was on Needle Drop as well, somewhere top 20.
Was it on
at
Needle
least.
Drop?
Needle
Okay,
Drop,
so it was on
I
a
mean,
few.
it's low teens, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. It's justified its position. So we're going to do this in the way we always do the album of the year, with a few sort of round robin questions. And we're just going to start by talking about our own albums of the year. So we're going to have 90 seconds each to tell you what our album of the year is. And I'm going to start with Matt once I can find my timer.
Uh-oh.
Are you ready, Matt?
Yeah.
So go.
Okay. I'm going to start by saying, I guess I should start by saying the album.
Yeah,
I forgot you didn't introduce it. Anyway,
That's
this
8
is my
seconds.
favourite album of the year was Seat Headrest with Making a Door Less Open. And I'd say the previous album before this was called Teens of Denial, was if you looked up indie rock in like the dictionary, this was like the dictionary definition of that. It was a perfect epitome of that album. And so moving forward from that, you really have to, you can either walk that fine line of, do I do something that's exactly the same, or do I push forward? And how far do you push forward? And I think this album was the perfect line. It goes forward stylistically in really interesting ways. They've added and expanded the sound to include some more dancey and electronic sounds, and also some heavier rock moments as well. But it still sounds very much like Car Seat Headrest. It's just snappier, more diverse, and more interesting as an album as a whole. I don't think I could argue it's the best album of the year, but it's definitely my favorite, and I've enjoyed it a lot this year. And I'm also going to try and get ahead of the comments that I can see coming from the others. I know he sounds like Beck, and obviously owes a lot to Beck.
Sorry, Matt, you cannot get ahead of those comments because the alarm has gone off and your 90 seconds
I'm
is
just
over.
unleash our wrath about Car Seat Headrest on so you can't defend yourself.
You do not get to do that. You'll have to do that later.
But I do want you guys to remember you can't just slag them off for the name.
Why don't you wait and see what happens?
Because all you've talked about is the name.
I mean,
for the past
Well, it's the
6
dumbest
months.
name for a band ever.
not to give my notes away too much, but my first bullet point does mention how shit their name is. But we're not there yet.
No.
Okay, Nick,
Okay.
90 seconds starts now.
On what was your favourite album of the year? Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
My favourite album of the year was Quelle Chris and Chris Key's Innocent Country 2. It's hard to know what to say more than I've already said about this. We covered it on the podcast a little while ago. Essentially, it's an album of clever, thoughtful, amusing, and smoothly flowing hip-hop throughout. It's very, very consistent. But at least as importantly as all the flow, it's musically possibly the most lush and beautiful hip hop album I've ever heard. I mean, it's up there with To Pimp a Butterfly to my mind in terms of the production standards. It just sounds so beautiful all the way through. And these two things, the flow, the kind of smooth rolling flow, and then the beautiful lush instrumentation work really well together. And it's sort of a set of narratives through the songs that you drift along with. And you notice, because of the way you can sort of be drawn through it, you notice these new nuances all the way through, over and over again, in terms of the lyrics and in terms of the production. So there are some really high point tracks like Living Happy, Black Twitter, and Make It Better is possibly my favourite track. But I think one of the things to say about it is that, generally speaking, it's really, really consistent all the way through, and therefore it's really hard to pick out favourite tracks. I will say, as I think I said on the podcast possibly before we did it a few months ago, I do think it has an annoying opening, like many albums at the moment has an annoying opening where it's just like a kind of...
It's enough
I
for you.
didn't finish that sentence. You have to
you.
imagine what I was going to say.
So basically, you've just finished your 90 seconds about your album of the year by slagging it off.
That's right. That's
what
what everyone's left with, is just that negative comment.
That's the only. When I do the Twitter quotes, that's the only one I'm going to pull.
Thank you.
Okay, Matt, you timing me.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
Yeah, get on it.
Ready?
I am.
Go.
Okay, so for me, nothing even came close to Punisher by Phoebe Bridgers in 2020. I was already a huge fan of hers after the debut, and I was very excited for the follow-up, but I really couldn't have predicted how much she would evolve and grow and take risks in the way she did. So as I always do, I'd purposefully ignored the singles in the build-up, and as soon as the short intro song at the start turned into the second song, Garden Song, I was immediately struck by the changes she had made. It's from a very clear, crystal clear production on the debut to something a bit muddier and dingier. And that kind of continues throughout the majority of the album. I think Phoebe continues to have her vocals and lyrics as the driving force behind the song, but there's a bit of a darker tinge and more layers to the instrumentation that make her voice stand out even more. I also think she's progressed massively in terms of storytelling and lyrics. Each song tells its own story, whether it be her obsession with Elliott Smith in Punisher, or an amazing little snapshot of a relationship in Moonsong. And even on Kyoto, which is definitely the poppiest song here, she paints a really vivid picture of a strained relationship with her father, and I just found that really powerful. And while I love the quiet, constant contemplative moments on the album, I think it's also really amazing to hear her let go a bit on some of the songs like Chinese Satellite, I See You, and especially in this year's best song, which is I Know the End. I think that's just a great song to end an album with, and the story she tells and the way the song evolves just really reminds me of some of my favourite artists. And to hark back to last episode, it's got a Bowie feel to the way that song's made. Yeah, I haven't been excited about this. Last sentence. I'm very excited about this artist. Was my final sentence.
Doesn't matter whether
There
you're
you go.
excited or
None
not,
of us, after saying before that we were all going to nail the 90 seconds, none of us did.
I know.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be really
that's
short.
our albums of the year. So as we always do, we'll now discuss those between us. I think as Matt has already sort of preempted the car seat headrest conversations, shall we start there?
Yeah.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah,
Want me
why
to
don't you
kick
go,
off?
Fran? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay, so I know I've given you a lot of shit about liking car seat headrest because of their mind-numbingly terrible name, but I had actually also spent time listening to a couple of the previous albums. They were playing at a couple of festivals I went to in the past, and I checked out Teens of Denial and Twin Fantasy. I genuinely found both of those albums unlistenable. I could not stand them. So I wasn't really very optimistic for your album of the year pick, but this album really, really did take me by surprise. It was definitely one of my contenders for my favourite discovery at first when I started, but some of the other albums grew on me and overtook it. But yeah, I really like the energy of the album. I like the sort of frantic feeling some of the songs have. I think my favourites Can't Cool Me Down, but I think that's partly because it reminds me of some of the more recent stuff the Folds have been doing, and I really like that.
Yeah.
And there are songs on this that make it really obvious to me why it's your album of the year as well. I think like Deadline's Hostile and Martin have a real sort of Metronomy LCD sound about them. And you know, I wasn't mad on Metronomy, but it reminded me of the better stuff for Metronomy. And then there's a song towards the end of the album called Life Worth Missing, which kind of reminded me of Frightened Rabbit, which you know is a pretty big compliment from me.
Yeah.
And then there's a song called There Must Be Blood. I really like that. There Must Be More Than Blood. I really like that. But there are a couple of caveats to my enjoyment, which is, I think, why some of the albums overtook it. And one of them you mentioned, I don't always love his voice. And there are two really poor songs, I thought. I thought What's With You Lately is just a hideous scrawl, which sort of reminds me of some of the things I didn't like about their previous work. And then the song Hollywood was kind of like a 90s Smash Mouth cover, I thought. I could not get into that at all. But really, even though they're two big blips on the album, I think the highs are really high. So yeah, I was really into it, and it was pretty high on my list.
Cool. Yeah, I definitely think they've moved in a direction that is very Matt centric. So I can definitely see why
it was a very you album. Yeah,
yeah.
But I think some of the good, because there's stuff that you listen to that I'm not into. That's a bit more sort of. If you think about the Disclosure album, for example, which is very upbeat, like this album is upbeat, but there is some emotion and some feeling in this album as well. So I think that's
yeah. There's more layers.
What about you, Nick?
So I'll start by saying, as it's no surprise to anyone, that I love experimentation. But the first track on this album, Weightlifters, is just an incredibly irritating way to build a sort of opening to an album. A very piercing, grinding kind of synth sound that just really put me off. And the first few times I went into the album, I was just like, what the hell is this? This is going to piss me right off. There are some other tracks like that I generally found to be irritating and not listenable and unlistenable, is I think the phrase Fran used. But there are some good parts in this album that I liked. I liked Deadlines, Hostile, and Deadlines, Thoughtful, actually. They're the best tracks in general, I would say. Yeah, and lyrically, I thought there was some interesting stuff going on. There's some really good sort of what I describe as pregnant phrases, like "Oh temptation, I could be part of you" is a kind of clever way of leaving a phrase open for interpretation in lots of different ways. That's from Deadline's Hostile. I thought the drum parts were a little bit flat sometimes, but it was very consistent and evenly paced. It was very like music we played in a New York bar, and I like New York bars, I'll just point out, but still, it sounded very like background to a New York bar to me, to sound a cool hipster place.
He does live in New York.
He does, yeah.
But he's not been in a bar for a good year now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's been a while.
Just trying to vaguely remember what it was like.
Yeah, maybe that's why, the nostalgia.
I will say, though, that there's some, it's a very mixed bag. There's some ups and some downsides. But the main problem I have with the album is that I do think it's actually derivative. It's at the point of being derivative with LCD Sound System to me. It seems like it's parts like... Hollywood is actually one of them. I think has got some of that in it, and almost all the tracks through it, actually, I think in terms of beats, sound very like LCD Sound System tracks. So that's a major concern if you're going to list it as album of the year. It needs to be something that, to me, pushes things forward, and this album doesn't do that. So it's a mixed bag. There is some good stuff on it, but yeah, I'm not. I wouldn't rate it in my top few of the year easily. That's it
I
for
could
me.
go with the derivative thing in terms of it did, because I just listed about 5 bands while I was talking about it, but I think because it felt like there was a lot of different influences, I didn't find it derivative of just one act. So
that's okay. I think you're right.
I find it kind of influenced by a lot of things, but not.
That's where the line is, isn't it? If it's got a mix of different bands, then it can't really be described as derivative of just one artist, can it? So that's definitely the problem for me. Is the LCD Sound System was just cast too long a shadow over this.
Oh, really? I see. I didn't even. Yeah.
Definitely has an LCD Sound System.
You don't hear LCD Sound System in it?
But I jumped to other indie rock bands first.
Ah, okay.
But there are... Yeah. Yeah, I need to listen. I'll listen with that lens next time.
The one other thing I had written down here was Car Seat Headrest is a shit name. Just wanted to put that out there in case nobody had covered it yet.
Car Seat Headrest is a really shit name, isn't it?
Okay.
It's definitely one of the worst, but hey.
Even he agrees. Okay. Matt, do you want to talk about either Phoebe Bridgers or Quelle Chris?
Let's start with Quelle Chris and Chris Keys. Mostly just because I'm really glad that Nick picked this, because it's also one of my favourite albums of the year.
Now you're going to make me feel guilty. I just slated your favourite album. You're going to tell me you like mine. That just makes me feel bad.
Well, I'm glad to make you feel bad.
Huh.
No, this had we covered it maybe 6 months ago, and it hasn't really left my rotation since. And I think a lot of that is to do with something I think Nick was kind of hinting at, is just but in less technical terms from me, is really just it has a really nice feel. It has like a warm haze throughout the entire album, and it feels very lived in to me. And so for me, it's like has this kind of summer evening vibe throughout the whole album that I just really enjoy and like to live in and experience, because it is very comforting. And I also just really like the fact that a lot of it's quite just introspective, and there's a lot of I guess I don't know. It feels like like they're in their own heads a little bit, but they're quite comfortable with that, as opposed to some of the other albums I think which we'll talk about inside their own heads, but it's more anxiety driven.
Okay.
for better or for worse.
I would just add that to what you're saying, that the flow actually matches that introspective mode. I think, you know, it's this very mellow sort of low pitch kind of flow is again. I think you're right. It sounds like he's kind of thinking things through. Yeah. Hadn't occurred to me.
Yeah. So it's definitely in my top 10 this year, and I think I said when we covered him before, Kelly Chris in particular, but I really like the complementation with Chris Keys as well. But Kelly Chris is becoming one of my favorite hip hop artists, because he's just doing his own thing in a really interesting way.
Okay. Right. Nick, do you want to talk about Phoebe Bridgers?
Sure. Okay. So to me, the Phoebe Bridgers album is really a vehicle for a really exquisitely beautiful voice. And that's what comes to... When I think about the album, I just think about that lilting, sort of stunning vocal all the way through it. And she is also a very strong lyricist, I feel like. There's a lot of simple phrasing that works really powerfully, like "I want to kill you if you don't beat me to it." I think that's Kyoto, isn't it? Yeah. So, so there's lots of really good stuff like that. I think in terms of my personal taste, it's a bit too consistently mournful through some of the album. It's very even in a way that I couldn't grasp onto as much. It didn't sort of sometimes it would drift through a few different songs and I would not notice starts and ends almost. I think that particularly that point is particularly pronounced between Kyoto and ICU. There's about 4 or 5 songs that are in that block there that are very similar pacing. So that was a bit of a problem for me. But Kyoto was definitely a high point. I had a bit more.
It's really weird. I thought that would be the song that you would hate on this album.
Well, it has a bit more pace to it, which is good. It's funny though, I saw a video about the production of it, and she described it, or the engineer described it as a rock track, and I thought that was kind of amusing because it's
it's
so mellow. It's
been nominated for the best rock performance at the Grammys, and as much as I love Phoebe Bridgers, and I'm glad she's been nominated. It's not a rock song.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, I haven't got tons more to say except. I enjoyed it. It's very nice to listen to. It's very kind of easygoing musically now. I'm not talking about lyrically. And she's a very clever writer. But I wish it had a few more undulations in the sort of pacing and melodic structures in the songs. That's what I would say is the downside. So generally a good thing, but not my favourite.
Okay, Matt.
I pretty much have exactly the same sentiments as Nick. Beyond that though, I would say I find it interesting that you said it's like a massive development, when I can see that she's made a lot of positive steps from her previous work, but it's not transformative. She's a very good artist, and she's very good at what she does, and she's added some extra pieces on top of that to make her more accomplished. But I don't think
big development in terms of the sort of the first album is very much a folk sort of. It's very acoustic. It's very sort of laid back. I think there's subtle changes, but I think they are quite big changes personally.
I guess the core of what I get from it and the feelings I get from the music hasn't changed. The way that the album flows really hasn't really changed that much. There are sometimes it's a bit muddier as you said, and sometimes it's a bit louder. But it's not the overall feel of the album hasn't stepped forward in like a massive way, but that was more just it wasn't for me as transformative of a step, but it's still it's good. It's really good. I can see why a lot of people like it. It's very much in the kind of I can see specifically why certain outlets really like it as well, and why you like it. It's very much in the kind of NPR, like perfect artist, which is normally a kind of genre I'm really into as well. It's just for some reason Phoebe Bridgers has never quite clicked for me. But yeah,
it just seemed to be like a Marmite one for a lot of it. I think it's interesting hearing Nick say about he really liked her voice, because that's one of the things that I found people. I mean, obviously I love her voice, but it's one of the things that I found people have not been able to get into it because of her voice. Do you think that's one of the things that holds you back, Matt?
Oh, no, I love her voice. It's exactly the same as Nick. Pacing. I get her albums are really like there's lulls in the album. I think it's a good album with some great songs. And then there's some stuff in between the great songs that it's nice, but not exciting.
Fair enough. Okay. Question 2. So the second question is, what was your favourite new discovery on the list? And I'm going to Nick first this time.
Okay.
You ready?
Yes, except that I don't know the name of the album, so somebody's going to have to fill it in for me.
Okay. Go.
So Fleet Foxes is my favourite discovery.
Sure.
Is that the name of the album, or am I sure? Is that what you're saying?
I'm not just saying sure. I'm just saying.
You're saying, are you sure it really is?
I think both work.
So I always felt that this band was really too dreamy for my taste. And I also felt like they were kind of a one-trick pony. And they were writing something close to sort of pleasant music, which is always something I tend to kind of avoid in many ways. But this is a great turn for them, and I feel like this is the best thing they've done. And the song construction and their production generally sound a lot more interesting, has some real energy at times, has some much more builds and swells that are more powerful than previous stuff I've heard of theirs, even though it's clearly still a Fleet Foxes album, so they haven't lost their identity. From the first track, I guess, which is Wading in wastewater, and he said wading in water waist high.
Wading in wastewater.
Yeah.
That sounds.
They seem to be. They kind of consciously play with the cliche of what a Fleet Foxes song should sound like, and they sort of rise out of that delicacy into something more, in the best possible way, kind of bombastic. And I Can Believe in You is probably my favourite track on the album. But the one problem I have is they still sound much too much reverb on the album as a whole. To me, it smacks of a lack of confidence in a band when I hear that. It seems to be like they're trying to conceal things sometimes. Not always, but and I find that disappointing that they bother to do that.
So far, nobody has hit 90 seconds on any answer.
Except that was my final word, so I was within a tenth of a second.
Lies. Okay, Matt, I'm going to go next. So you ready to time me?
Yeah. Yes, I am. Ready? Steady, go.
Okay, so without a doubt, my favourite discovery on the list was Open Mike Eagle's Anime, Trauma and Divorce. I'd heard of him, but I'd never listened to him before. And after a year when I'd been a bit disappointed with the majority of the hip-hop I'd heard, this was exactly what I needed, really. It's such a great album. It's so focused, so funny, so acerbic, so self-critical, and just really, really inventive. I love the whole idea that threads through it about anime and comic books, and how he seems to be positing an idea that black people in America should be using these sort of hero stories as sort of self-care and inspiration. I just find that really interesting. And it's also just quite refreshing to hear a hip-hop album that sounds aggressive in its beats, but is willing to be so vulnerable in its words and its stories. I know this album came at the end of a year when he got divorced, when he lost his contract on a TV show, and when the musical groups he were in all split up, so he'd had a pretty heavy year. But it's fascinating to me that he addresses all of this on this record, but manages to be hilariously funny at the same time. I think the song about a Black Mirror episode ending his marriage seems like a crazy joke, but it turns out that's actually true. He split up with his wife after watching an episode of Black Mirror. The song "What the Fuck Is Self-Care" really connected with me. It's something. I work as a mental health worker, and I get asked that all the time by my clients. But it's really interesting to hear like a grown man open up about attending therapy and finding everything they tell him totally useless. I just thought that was brilliant. I could pick out lyrics from either of those songs or any of the songs to hear how funny it is, but Head Ass, wow, I've got loads left to say. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Wow.
Head Ass.
I had loads left to say. Open Mike Eagle.
Never going to know what you thought of Head Ass.
We'll never know.
Yeah, top secret.
Yeah. Wow. I timed that as well.
Really?
You've actually been running
Nerd.
test runs of these read-throughs.
No.
Well, because I knew there was a lot to say, so I thought I'd best time it. But okay, so
Now the next one you're
Mimis-
going to be like trying to get through everything.
Well, I'm
very
just going to
relaxing.
say it all when Matt stops talking anyway. Okay,
Yeah.
Matt, over to you, mate. Go.
So I actually have the most to say about this one as well. I'm going to put down for the one I like the most or new is Poppy. I disagree, and
Okay.
I imagine everyone else is going to hate this, but I had so much fun listening to this album. It's ridiculous, over the top, goofy, but unabashedly like true to itself. In the first 90 seconds of the first song, you have like sirens, a sinister whispering, then some massive metal riffs. Then it busts into like this weird indie pop that's like Kiro Kiro Bonito, and it's sickly sweet. Then there's more metal riffs, and then some like really gentle keys and some like gentle singing, like a 50s kind of vibe to it, like Beach Boys almost. It's just wild, and it just keeps swinging around like this. It obviously owes a lot to like some J-pop metal acts like Baby Metal and things like that, but it's taken those influences and done something really, really just fun and silly with it. And even though I keep using the words fun and silly, it has this very much dark, sinister undertone to it to match this very sickly sweet nature of it. And there's this dichotomy that's kind of unnerving throughout it. And it just feels, as an album, very unhinged. But I enjoyed listening to it a lot. I think I'm just going to stop there because I have so much other stuff.
That was exactly
But
90 seconds,
did it.
so nicely
Victory,
done.
victory is yours.
Okay, we've all answered that, haven't we?
Yes.
Should we go in the order? Should we start with Fleet Foxes? Matt, can you talk about Fleet Foxes right now? Or
Or is it another category?
I definitely can. I've written, we've gone from the most I've written about in my notes to the least I've written. This, for me, this could be, this could have been like released at any time. It doesn't feel relevant at all to this year. It feels like, it was interesting to hear, again, like Nick say, this is different to the previous stuff, and I've only really listened to that when they were like massive like 10 years ago, but it felt like, oh, it's them again and they're doing the same stuff. And it's obviously, I like music this year to be relevant to this year could be, I feel like talking about the topics, or it could be like a soothing balm and like a distraction, and this obviously it's aiming for the latter. It does feel like nice all the way through and pleasant, but that, I think, is that if you're going to say a band is nice, that is what I think of. I think of Fleet Foxes, and that hasn't changed with this album. It's perfect in a family-friendly bar in the middle of the afternoon while you're drinking a cider, and that's
You got
that's
more bar
really
music
it.
then.
Yeah,
Unlike Seat Headrest, which is more like a nightclub in New York. Yeah.
Yeah. No, this is fine. I'm not going to listen to this ever again, though.
you done?
Yeah.
Okay, so the last question we'll ask of the four for this round robin is around what was the most surprising album of the year contender, and after the one that I've chosen for that, this would be the next on the list. I just can't really fathom why it's on anyone's list, and it's on a lot of lists, but it's just very okay, isn't it? It's just okay. I mean, it's pleasant. The songs are nice enough. It's kind of listenable. I've written background music, so yeah, family friendly bar works for me there, I think. But that's pretty much what I would have said about every Fleet Foxes album so far. You know, I thought, given how well it had done on all the end of year lists, that they must have done something a bit new, but it doesn't feel that way to me. They're the middle ground of a genre that I generally really like, and they sound very middle ground. They're certainly not bad. They're good at what they do, but they don't inspire me at all on this record. I think there's a couple of standouts. I think Jara and Young Man's Game are really good songs. But it got me thinking about the Bright Eyes album we covered recently, another album that's getting praise that I just don't understand. It's the same as what they've always done. But having said that, I would rather listen to this than the Bright Eyes album just because I prefer his voice. But I will not be coming back to this album. I do not get the fuss. Not terrible, but I just don't understand why it's so popular.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm hugely surprised that it only just got beaten out to that spot for me.
Yeah, same.
And I think the only reason I didn't have it is because I rationalised that they're like indie darlings and indie folk darlings, and so
like Nick apparently.
Yeah, that's me all over. Yeah, you know me.
You got any comeback there before we move on to Open Mike Eagle, Nick? Or
Not really. No, I mean I definitely see about the risk because of the verb I was talking about, the risk of it sounding too sort of wishy-washy and sort of dreamy. I can see that. I think I was just lifted from what I'd heard before of this band, so that's why it was a new discovery for me. You know, it was something I did think was distinct from those albums before. But yeah, I'm not saying that it's my favorite. It certainly was not my favorite of the year, as we already talked about. But yeah, I would defend it in terms of the interest in the song construction, which I think was better than you were giving credit for, either of you.
Okay, fair enough. All right, Nick, do you want to talk about Open Mike Eagle?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so not got a ton to say, except I think Head Ass is probably the worst song on this playlist of everything we've done out of 9 albums. And the album otherwise is really, really forgettable to me. It's really, I feel like it's doing nothing special, and I find the mixing of it to be really, really irritating all the way through because his voice is so far forward. It's just slamming you in the face all the time. It's like, just back off. Just back the fuck off. It's irritating. So I found it very difficult to listen to, honestly. I mean, I went through it the requisite number of times required for this experience. But that's it. And like you said about the Fleet Foxes, I will not be going back to it. I don't understand why there'd be a big fuss about it. It just seemed like a okay hip-hop album with terrible mixing and a shit song at the start.
The Head Ass is fantastic as well, and it's got the funniest lyrics on any song I've heard in a very long time, and I think there's some brilliant asides on it. I love that song, so yeah, I'll have to agree to disagree on that.
We will.
Matt, in the middle?
I'm going to talk about it in a sec.
Okay. Okay, so Poppy. I'll talk about Poppy.
Go to town.
Okay, so when looking at this playlist before listening to it, Poppy stood out as the obvious contender for something I wouldn't be able to get into. I mean, if you just look at the cover of the album, the severe makeup, the dog collar, it made me think I was very unlikely to get any enjoyment out of the music, but I really, really did. In a playlist that I thought was generally really good, this album was definitely in the top 5 for me. I'm not massively into heavy stuff, and it turned out this wasn't as heavy as I thought it was going to be from the imagery. I think it struck a really interesting balance between being heavy and being poppy and fun. I think it treads that line really well. I also think we've listened to other albums, like I bring this up a lot because it pissed me off so much, but the Chelsea Wolf album, that just felt really unauthentic in its darkness. Whereas this album was more all over the place, but it didn't feel unauthentic at any point. It felt like a really genuine artist and a genuinely interesting artist as well. I also think another couple of albums that we've covered that I wanted to mention were the Gene Dawson and the Rina Sawayama. I think two albums that are really mixing genres, and I found them really interesting because of the ways they mix genres. I didn't really enjoy listening to them all that much personally. I think this album mixes genres in a similar way, but it felt more organised in that and more cohesive. And for me, it was therefore a much more enjoyable listen. You know, I wouldn't say the likelihood that I'm going to listen to this album loads again is that high, but really when I listen to playlists like this, and like Nick's just said about the Open Mike Eagle, there's always usually a couple of albums that I skip quite a bit, and I assumed this would be one of them, but I never skipped it as I went through. I thought it was a really fun and interesting album, and I think it does deserve people's attention. I think people should give it a listen. Yeah, that's me.
I don't know if Nick wants to jump in now, but
I'm going to talk about Poppy later.
Okay. Well, I think the one thing I'd add to that then is I think one of the reasons it is successful is it isn't shooting quite as high, I think, as Sawayama and Gene Dawson. It's mixing less genres. Like, both of those are mixing like 4 or 5 different sounds at once into the same song. Well, this just feels, it's like pop and it's metal and then a few things in between, but like really they're the 2 main sounds I get from it.
Yeah.
And
that makes sense.
I think that just makes it easier but that isn't a detraction from it. It's she's done what she can do.
Yeah, and I think it shows a control as well to not sort of go over the top with all of it. I think it's
Yeah.
I mean, I think we can probably guess that Nick, from this reaction, Nick might not be saying the same, but we'll see when we get there.
I know.
Maybe it'll be the most 2020 album for him.
It could be. Okay, so that is the next question, and I'm going to start this time. So the next question is, which album felt the most relevant to 2020? Matt, can you time me when you're ready? Yeah. Okay, so I'm personally quite surprised about what album I ended up picking as the most relevant to 2020, because the first couple of times I heard it, it felt like a total throwback. But I'm going with Cornershop's England is the Garden for this one. Don't get me wrong, it is a throwback album in a lot of ways. There are sounds of the 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s in there. But in terms of its themes, I think it has some of the most interesting things to say about the state of play in 2020. I think that's particularly interesting given it came out in March before the year really went to shit. But if you spend time with the lyrics of the opening song, Saint Marie Under Cannon, it is very much a song that intersperses images of war with images of protest. And I think there's a particularly interesting set of lyrics about using music and the sound system as a weapon. I think that's really something we saw emerge a lot this year, and that was interesting. And then there's the track Everywhere That Wog Army Roams. Using that word, the word wog is obviously a very hugely offensive word, but it felt quite powerful in the way that he uses it. I don't think it's ever been reclaimed, that word, in the same way that the N-word has, but he is trying to sort of use it here to unite all people of colour together in the fact that they're all mistreated by the police, which I found really interesting. So yeah, I think there's some really powerful political moments on this album that are dressed up under a sort of jaunty, cheery sound, but they've got a lot to say. And other times they haven't got a lot to say, but even when they haven't, it's a much more enjoyable album than I expected it to be. I don't think it feels particularly fresh, but I do think it's fun. And when you add that to the political bits about it, I think it definitely deserves its place on some of these lists. 90 seconds.
91 seconds.
Yeah, not quite.
91 seconds.
Close.
Okay, so we are going to... I messed this up at the start, by the way. I just totally got my order wrong on the first question, so I now have to figure out that it is Matt next.
It's me?
Are you ready? Go.
My album that I thought was most relevant to this year was Open Mike Eagle. And the reason that there's some of these songs that are just are talking about stuff that is happening. I think when we were talking about Kelly Chris, I talked about introspectiveness, but from a comfortable place. This very much feels like from a anxiety-driven place, and I feel it reflects a lot of the moods that are currently going on, at least personally, with the whole lockdown and stuff like that. Like going through things like a Black Mirror episode and feeling like when you're stuck with your partner inside and you have arguments over the stupidest shit, or like what the fuck is self-care, like Fran was alluding to, as someone who is in their 30s trying to figure out, especially as a guy, figuring out how you're supposed to take care of yourself in a way that is productive when you're stuck inside, and take care of your mental health. It's the way he addresses it is all like real shit issues that are very prevalent right now, but he's also the entire way through so witty, so funny. The only reason I didn't pick this is like my new find or whatever is because I've been a big fan of his wittiness for a little while now, and he's been someone I've been thinking about bringing to the podcast in the past.
Okay, so you liked it then. So Nick is wrong. We can determine on that.
Nick is.
If it was down to majority vote, then yeah, but that's not how we do things here. Yeah. I'm always right, and that's as simple as facts, you know. So.
I mean, you are the older statesman, so we should.
There you go. Thank you. Show me some respect. Yeah. All right.
Okay, so Nick, which album did you think was the most relevant to 2020? Go.
Most relevant is Poppy. The name of the album, I forget again. Sorry, I've only written down. I disagree.
That's the name of the album. I'm not disagreeing with.
Yeah. Exactly, we're doing this every time. So I find it really hard to decide on this one for a while. I think the smashed together kind of genres is something that I generally love, as people probably wouldn't be surprised to hear me say. But some of these genres, new metal, sort of power pop and stuff, are very off-putting to me. So, but I noticed in the opening song, Concrete, it's very, very apologetic in these terms. It's very much kind of just announcing that it's going to do this stuff and it's going to go ahead, be very forthright about it. And I think that's very conceptually punk. even if it's not musically necessarily punk. And I think that's something I can really respect. So even though the sort of uncomfortable and sort of in-your-face production, I have to give it credit for that. And I think I need to judge it on the basis of what it thinks it wants to, what I think it wants to achieve. And in those terms, it's very, very successful to me. It's jarring, it's powerful, it's demanding, and it's unapologetic. So I liked it a lot for that. And overall, I think it might have been a best discovery, but I think it's more appropriate for this year because it's such a fucking hard year. This is hard. This is a hard listen in many ways, and I think in that sense it sort of fits the bill. There we go.
Nailed it.
Cool.
Well, I know we've spoken about Poppy previously, but I just want to start by saying I'm totally shocked that it's received such a positive response from all of us, really. I was not expecting that.
It's one of the few albums that's received a unanimous thumbs up.
Even though it was the lowest on the ratings of the various lists we looked at, wasn't it? Didn't appear in many.
Yeah.
I definitely am surprised that you two were into it as well because I have history with the new metal.
Well, mate, I was a new metal fan as well at the time, so you know.
I despise new metal, but I still thought
Yeah.
this worked for me. Yeah. So
I think, Fran, you're still ashamed of that, and I still listen to new metal.
I mean, I'm still looking forward to when you do Linkin Park as a Why I Love.
Yeah.
I am ashamed of how into Limp Bizkit I was, but
I'm going to be away for that episode,
Poppy,
I'm afraid.
great.
I'm sorry, I'm not around for that episode. I've got to be somewhere, so you have to carry on your own.
Right, so the only one there that we haven't discussed before was Cornershop. Do either of you want to talk about that right now, or?
I wasn't going to.
I'm not going to.
Okay, neither of you are going to talk about that right now.
No.
Okay, that's maybe a sign.
As there's only one question left.
If we're not going to talk about anything else, I was also going to add the one thing I had left on my notes. Well, I had a bunch left on my notes, so like you all, but the one extra thing I had was the fact that he writes at some point, "It's October, I'm tired," and it's so
So
relatable as a lyric.
Well, that was what I was getting to with him as well. With one of the lyrics on Head Ass, when he just says in the background, there's all these great lyrics in it, but there's loads of asides, and at one point he just says, "Why am I like this?" And every time he said it, I must listen to this album. I bought this album on record, and I must listen to this album more than any of the others this month. And every time I hear that line, I laugh. I just think it's so well placed. His timing. I know he's a comedian as well, and his comic timing on this album is fantastic.
Yeah.
Just the whole
I think
thing.
it's the delivery as well.
Yeah.
Because both that line and the line I was talking about, the tone he sets is just so relatable.
Yeah.
It sounds like something you'd say.
And he's definitely like, this is the thing with doing the podcast I like, is when he's an artist that I now will go and listen to everything by them. I was that excited by this album. So I'm really glad that you picked that one. Cool. Okay. So final question is, which album were you most surprised to see getting picked as an album of the year contender? And we are going to start with Matt. Are you ready, Matt?
Yeah.
Go.
Okay, so as no surprise, it's Cornershop, and it was between this and Fleet Foxes for me, and that I don't find a lot of similarities in the way I was thinking about these two albums is because I had an earlier preconception. I know some of their previous music from a decade or more than a decade ago. I haven't listened to anything in between, really. And then I come back to it and it's like, oh, this sounds exactly what I expected. And I get what the points Fran was making, like lyrically, there is some interesting stuff going on. And a lot of the songs I enjoyed. As an album, it was fine. I didn't dislike it at any point. But it didn't feel current to this year. And I think I would have been quite warm on this album in a regular episode, but in the context of album of the year, it just didn't feel like it was really a contender. Like all of the other albums, I felt had some merit for here or there, or some argument, but I just didn't see the argument for this one, and that is why I was most surprised.
Okay, is that you?
Me.
Right, so we're going to Nick, and I don't know if there's going to be any surprises here, but Nick, what did you
I'm going to go with Cornershop, actually. And I'm going to have to divide it into the lyrical content and the political context of what it's saying, which I think I see where Fran was going with that, and the actual music in this album. And this ultimately is a podcast about music, and this music is so tinny. It's so tinny. It sounds like it's being played down a telephone, an old-style telephone. It's so, particularly the drum sounds, the guitars, they sound like demos of real tracks. They sound like somebody's just playing it to the producer down the phone so they can say, oh, yeah, this might be a go. Let's try and record that properly later. It sounded very much, as Matt said, it sounded like when everyone was really into Brimful of Asher in 94 or whatever. It sounded like...
It's quite that long ago.
It was something like that, yeah. And it's just the same. It sounds exactly the same as that. It sounds like this is part of the same album. There's no progress at all. There are some bits that sounded more 70s, but I think that was just a throwback on the previous versions of their music anyway. That's always sounded a bit more 70s. So musically, I just thought it was very like by the numbers in terms of the actual song construction and stuff. But again, the biggest problem was I just couldn't get past how thin the sound was. It just was, like Fran Summer says, unlistenable. That's me.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so you ready to time me, Matt?
Yeah. You ready?
Okay. Yeah.
Go.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say I don't think there was a single album on this list that I actually thought was a bad album. They were all at least decent. So usually this would be the part of the segment of the podcast where I get really snarky and lay into something, but I can't actually do that today. Second of all, though, I want to apologise in advance to Nick, because the album I am most surprised to see at the top of an album of the year list is Kelly Chris's Innocent Country 2. I doubt that's a massive shock to you, as I wasn't particularly positive about it when we covered it on the previous podcast. And if anything, it did slightly grow on me from the last time, but only slightly. Other than Sacred Save, which I think is a fantastic song, I find it pretty one-dimensional and bland. It never infuses me or energizes me. I do appreciate there's some really good lyrics and some good themes, but because the beats just never captivate me at all, I never get pulled in by the words. So yeah, I don't want to lay into it. It's not a terrible album by any means. It's a decent album, but the idea that it could be an album of the year in such a strong year for music is a bit baffling to me. I also think the reason I picked it for this question over something like the Fleet Foxes is that I can see why the Fleet Foxes is considered a standout to people who like a certain type of music. But even in a year when hip-hop wasn't really blowing me away, this wasn't close to the top of the pile of stuff that I had heard and enjoyed. And I would have thought you'd have picked Run the Jewels over this. And then having heard the Open Mike Eagle, which I think does a lot of the comedy stuff that this album does a lot better, that would be my favourite hip-hop album I've heard this year. So yeah, that is mine. And I am sorry, Nick. I'm done.
Deeply hurt. Deeply hurt.
Perfect.
I apologise.
Painful.
But it's all about honesty on this podcast. You know that.
Yeah.
So. Okay.
Did you want to respond to our Cornershop comments?
I mean, not really, because I will say that I agree in a lot of respects in that it's. I think if it hadn't been some of the lyrics that really connected with me, I suppose, particularly around, he is also from India. There's some stuff in there that really connects with me in terms of the history and stuff I know about the band. But I do get that it's a throwback album and it's not relevant in terms of its sound. And there are songs on there that I found a little bit unlistenable. There are songs on there that I really liked as well. So it's not like it's one of my favourite. It doesn't hit my top 5 here. I just felt that the stuff around protest and stuff that they talk about did feel relevant to this year. And I actually think I did quite a bit of reading about Cornershop, and I do think they were really interesting. I'm more interested in them now than I ever have been, because I think reading back into their sort of political stances, and they were burning T-shirts with Morrissey's face on it like 10, 20 years ago, before people had really turned on to what a racist scumbag Morrissey is. So I find it really interesting as an album, but I'm not like upset that you guys didn't. I'm surprised that you both chose it as the worst, as the most surprising album here. I'm a little surprised, but I'm not that surprised.
And I think politically, as I said, if you divide it out like I was trying to suggest, then I think politically it has a lot of interesting things to say. Yeah. I just think musically it doesn't deliver in a format that I would care to listen to. Yeah,
I mean, after the Fleet Foxes and the Kelly Chris, it would be the next one closest to being, that's where it would come on the list for me. So it's not like I was in love with it, but I did find it really interesting.
I definitely don't think it's the worst album on here as well. It's just it's the context of the question of surprising.
Yeah.
It
makes sense.
They're a band 20 who really I haven't really heard much about for 20 years.
And the ones I expected it to be Poppy, Fleet Foxes, or Cornershop that people chose for that question. So it doesn't surprise me that it was Cornershop.
Yeah.
But okay, Nick, do you want to have a go at me about Kelly Chris, I just
Not
want to
really.
move on
I feel like
pretend it never happened.
I mean, I'm just gonna. Yeah, it's like a trauma memory. I blanked it out. Yeah, I'm shedding a tear. No, I mean, I think I've spoken about it a lot. I've written on the blog about it as well. So yeah. It's I stand by what I think. It's one that stayed with me a lot, and it'll continue to be in rotation. And his work in general is something I'll be following closely because I think everything. I love Guns as well. That was fantastic a few years ago. All that stuff. Yeah.
Get there with him. I don't know why, because I don't. Like I said then, I don't think it's terrible in any way. I just don't get there with him for some reason. But
yeah, it's surprising because I would have thought he would be right in the sweet spot. But
well, it's the sort of slower side of hip hop. I think I say that a lot on the podcast. You know, I think because of my growing up and the hip hop I was into as a kid. You know, I usually like my hip hop to be a bit more aggressive.
I think that's very. I've seen that as well in your taste for this because I think as well with when we talked about To Pimp a Butterfly versus Damn. You know, this is very much in the To Pimp a Butterfly vein. Whether it's better production or not is highly debatable, but probably not. Most people would think, but still, it's in that school of things, and you're not into that school of things. So yeah.
I mean, I like To Pimp a Butterfly, obviously.
Yeah, but you didn't like it as much as Damn, did you?
Overrated.
And Damn was much more hard edged.
Yeah, that's what I go for with hip hop generally. Which is why I love the Open Mike Eagle so much because it was quite hard hitting, but also really vulnerable and really open. So that was I think that's my hip hop sweet spot, to use the term that Matt keeps using. Anyway, we have 2 more albums. You use it every episode, mate. You use it every episode at least once.
He's keeping a count, so he knows.
That's a sweet spot.
Yeah, I have to listen. Remember, I listen to these to pick out all the tweets.
So nobody listens to him close. I do the edit. Nobody listens to him closer than me. Trust me on that. I have to go by second.
Maybe.
So, yeah.
Okay, we've still got 2 albums to talk
Matt's heavy
about.
breathing.
We've still got Chloe and Halle's Ungodly Hour and Taylor Swift's Folklore. Should we start with Matt? Just made a big sigh when I said Chloe.
No, he's doing some heavy breathing just to piss me off. So I've got more work to do. That's why.
I wasn't actually listening to you two. I was thinking about
I know.
moving forward. Matt, anyway, I'm going to go to Matt and say, Matt, do you want to start us off with Chloe and Halle, Ungodly Hour?
Oh yeah, sure. I really like this album. It's great. I overall thought it was very fun. This kind of fun R&B sound, and I really like the interplay between the 2 singers. I think they had a lot. Obviously, they're sisters, and so they have a lot of chemistry throughout the songs and the album. And I just found that I was often just like really bouncing along to this while I was listening to it in my desk chair. I think Tipsy is maybe the best example of this. It's like has these kind of bouncy and diverse beats, and there's like several layers that are all kind of playfully interacting with each other, and then the vocals mirror that perfectly and kind of just bounce over the top, and they're all over the beats. They're very like the songs where their vocals are very forward and like really on top of the beat as it goes are really, really fun and engaging, and I just had a really good time with them. I think another track would be Busy Boy is similar to that. They do have slower stuff, but I think that was also executed pretty well, and they managed to have a mix so that it doesn't feel like it's all just the same thing throughout the entire album. So yeah, and I think lyrically also just solid. I like all round very good album. Not surprised it's being so highly rated.
Cool. I assume the time wasn't running for that, Fran, because he went on for about 10 minutes. So
yeah, no, we're not timing on these last 2. I'm going to jump in because me and Matt are saying quite similar things here. So for me, it's an album that I think could have gone either way when I chose it. But I think one of the things that's been really good about doing this podcast over the last couple of years for me is I have let go of some of my snobbery around pop and R&B. I actually give some of these albums time instead of just dismissing them on the fact that the cover makes me want to vomit. So, the fact that I chose this album kind of indicates that a little bit. And in this case, I'm really, really glad that I did. I think it's an incredibly slick, well-produced and enjoyable album. I know they've supported Beyonce and have been mentored by her a little bit. And you can really hear that, I think. There's a sort of modern-day Destiny's Child to some of the songs. And yeah, it's not massively deep stuff, but this is a 20-year-old and a 22-year-old singing about their experiences, and I really sort of enjoyed that looseness to the album. And particularly into the first half of the album, I think most of my favourites are there. I think Forgive Me, Baby Girl, Tipsy. I mean, Tipsy is probably the most fun song on this whole playlist. Busy Boy, which Matt's just mentioned, is my favourite track here. It's got a really great beat, probably has some of the darkest lyrics that they have. And I think the album tails off a little bit after that. I think Catch Up isn't a great song. Overwhelmed is a bit forgettable. I think Don't Make It Harder on Me is the worst song on the album. It's a bit overblown, but even then it's not terrible. And then I think it ends well with the track ROYL, which I'm not sure what that stands for, but I liked it.
Royal?
Royal? Why is there no A in it then?
Because it's cool and it's all in all caps.
Okay, well that's put me off it a little bit. But yeah, I think, when I think of all the pop albums we've covered, I'm not going to say all the R&B albums because, that would include Lemonade and A Seat at the Table. But when I think of all the pop albums we've done, I think this is probably my favourite that we've done.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah. That'd be me. Nick?
Yeah. So I'll be pedantic, as I love to be anyway, and just say that, like several of the albums, even the Quelle, Chris, I found the opening little track there quite irritating and sort of put me in a bad mood at the start of the album. Don't ever ask for permission, ask for forgiveness. It's such a tired cliche, I felt like. So that made me feel like, is it going to be
Leave them alone. They're kids, man.
I know. Well, this is what I mean. I'm being really pedantic. Because after that sort of tiny little bump in the road, this actually is a really good album, I think. Really interesting album. And it has some really sort of interesting blend of bass synths and sort of big kick drums. And, it's produced really beautifully. And the vocal performances are pretty spectacular. In fact, I was distrustful of them, to be honest, because I thought they were just probably, too engineered to perfection when I listened to it on the album. So I went and listened to the KEXP performance they did, and they really do sing just as well as that. Yeah. It's pretty unbelievable. So, I think there's a song, Don't Make It Harder on Me, which has this ending where they sort of dance around each other with these harmony parts, both of them both singing harmonies over each other, as it were, if that's possible. And it sounds pretty spectacular, yeah. So, overall, I did enjoy it. Not really something I'll probably go back to much, because it's not really a genre I'm that interested in generally, but I think it has a lot going for it, and I also thought Tipsy was probably the strongest track for me.
You're blowing my mind sometimes today, mate.
I know.
I'm totally unpredicted.
Because I'm so open-minded.
So wrong. Yeah. Like Tipsy, because when I wrote down I like Tipsy, and when Matt just said it, I was like, Nick's going to slag that song off like crazy. But no,
production-wise, I thought it worked really well. The way the sort of bass kind of undulated and fluctuated, and the
maybe you've grown as well.
Yeah, I think
because it makes me think of some of the songs in the past.
Music now.
Yeah, in the past, I think you would have called that song facile. I think that would have been the exact word you would have used.
Yeah, I mean, what I think I'm doing a bit more in this episode in general, and trying to in general, is split out lyrical content and things like that from music. The sound of the actual tone and tune and stuff. So
you've just changed your whole outlook on music for this episode.
Well, no, I think I'm going in that direction in general, because if I divide that out, for example, the Cornershop would score highly lyrically, but it just sounds like shit. Whereas Chloe and Halle, is not very profound stuff, but I think it's really produced very well. Yeah.
Okay. Fascinating. Okay, are we all done on that? I'd like to start off on Taylor Swift, if that's okay with you guys.
Yeah, go for it.
You can be my guest.
Honestly, in all my time doing this podcast, and that's 38 episodes now, I think Folklore is the album that I have found it the hardest to make my mind up about. Do I love it? Do I hate it? I really don't know yet. There were definitely moments.
Make your mind up. You've got 10 seconds to decide.
Seriously.
Come on.
There are definitely moments I really, really like, starting with Exile at track 4, and I think that's the obvious draw for me because it features Bon Iver. But I also really rate the two tracks that follow it. I think My Tears, Ricochet and Mirrorball are both gorgeous, understated songs. And there are other songs later on the album that I feel the same about, like This Is Me Trying is one, for example. Obviously, the reason I chose this album for the list is because of Aaron Dessner's involvement. He's one of my favourite songwriters, one of my favourite producers. He produces a lot of albums of like solo, acoustic women that I've loved, and I really was excited and wanted to love this album. But when I first listened to it, I really didn't like it at all. There were certain things I just couldn't get past. There are parts of this album that totally live up to all the things that previously made Taylor Swift unlistenable. There's unlistenable again. But Taylor Swift's previous stuff has all been unlistenable, and there's parts of this album that still have that. Like, her voice is just so sickly sweet at times. Not all the time, and on this album, definitely not all the time. But on all the previous singles I'd heard and some of this album's songs, it feels like she's singing from a school photo when she's 5 years old and she's resting her chin on her hands and batting her eyelids. It's just so la la la, and it just that grates on me sometimes. And songs like Invisible String are the biggest example of that. And then the other thing that I struggle with is I'm not going to sit here and say that her lyrics are bad, but I will say that they really don't speak to me at times. On certain songs, Betty is the big example here. I know it's one of the most popular songs on the album, but Taylor is a 31-year-old woman now, and these lyrics, I know they're about being 17, but they sound like they were written by a 12-year-old. But the fact that these extreme reactions exist within an album, the stuff I absolutely love, and the stuff that drives me mad, it's quite confusing to me. And then the fact that this is probably, well, it is, after Phoebe and Open Mike Eagle, this is the third most listened to album on this list for me. So it tells me that when I could switch off from those certain elements, there was a lot about the album I was really impressed by. So, and then I just want to finish off saying all that confusion I had about the album is totally encapsulated by one song. The song The Last Great American Dynasty is probably the most obvious Aaron Dessner song in terms of production and instrumentation. The beat could be a national song, and it is a really gorgeous, beautiful, catchy song, but its lyrics make me want to vomit. It's like a Jane Austen novel gone wrong. So the lyrics, I mean, listen, the wedding was charming if a little gauche. There's only so far new money goes. They picked out a home and called it Holiday House. I mean, I'm not saying they're bad, but I lose count of the amount of ways in which they don't speak to me. So yeah, I don't know. And in the end, I think I have to say it's a remarkable achievement that this album, I think, treads a line between her fan base and the people who have loved her for a long time and a whole new group of people who you have seen loads of people coming in and falling in love with this album. So I have to commend her for that. But I also just don't know if I'll ever put it on again. But I also might listen to it a million more times and I might buy it on record. So I really haven't got a fucking clue.
Wow.
So someone else
really
talk
helpful.
about it.
Thanks very much. I'll jump in on this one. Yeah. It's so interesting you say about the fact that she's is she 31? I didn't know she was 31.
Yeah, she's 31.
So I think there's a lot of overlap and there's some divergence. There's a lot of overlap with what you're saying. For example, Betty is the one I picked out as well as being such a tired idea for a song from somebody who is and I think it's interesting you talk about playing to kind of her bass. You know, this song is written. It's by her, but not sort of for her, as it were. It's for another audience that I think she's sort of cowed by, you know, that she sort of has to play to, literally. And I think that's really unfortunate because I think there's actually some skill in this work, and she is actually better than I hadn't really listened to anything she'd done before. Honestly, you know, that's probably surprising to some people, but anyway. So yeah, to me, it was actually a lot better than I'd expected in my sort of cynicism, and there were some clever expressions and some clever kind of turns and stuff. But I think, I got this impression all the way through that she was feeling almost a tension that she wanted to write songs that were mature, but she felt she wasn't able to. That she had to write them for a younger audience. Although I presume her audience are getting older with her, so I don't quite understand why she feels.
Well, then
the
I
need
think
to
because
write.
she's been putting out pop albums for so long that the new audience of teenagers, every time there's a new album out, she gets a lot more younger fans again. I think.
Yeah.
So
Really,
I think
yeah.
it's,
I mean, I would have assumed
my
that. I would have
10-year-old
assumed
niece likes her. So
right. I would have assumed that people were getting older with her, and therefore maybe not. Maybe I can see what you're saying. Maybe that's the way it's gone. Yeah. So, so it was a bit of a pity, really, that, and sort of made it seem a lot weaker than it could have done. I think the Bon Iver song, I know you're not going to be surprised, Fran, is one of the weaker tracks on the album.
Oh,
I just think it was so Bon Iver. It was just like, yep, this is the Bon Iver song, and this is the Bon Iver feature.
Yeah,
he's right here.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, he's right here doing his thing. He always does. So yeah, that was no, that was not the best. But I thought there was some good. And one thing I'll say as well, it had some beautiful, and not surprisingly for the amount of money I'm sure they had to produce it with, some beautiful, lush kind of pianos and stuff. The pianos on Cardigan, for example, really, really just immaculate, absolutely immaculate. So
another lyric that really wound me up though, about being an unused cardigan under the bed. I mean, fuck off.
Yeah. So again, just musically speaking, I thought that was it sounded really, really beautiful. And again, a little bit like the Chloe and Halle though, when I was nervous that it was sort of contrived. I don't know if in this case maybe it was, but I gave it a pass basically, and it sounded really, just really nice to the ear. So yeah, but yeah, so that's what I'd say about that one. Yeah, Matt.
So I would actually disagree and say it went over that line, and it to me felt like a lot of the album very try hard. I, the best comparison I had to think about this is do you guys watch anime at all? I don't think you really do.
I've seen some,
Not particularly.
if that helps.
Yeah, so like often in anime there's just every second there's over the top emotional
Everything's amplified.
Amplified,
sense,
exactly. And everyone's super thankful of each other, and they're going to try to the max. I'm going to do my best this time, and they're saying that same thing every single like 30 seconds, and it felt like this album was like, oh, my emotions to the max, and it just in the context of everything else going on this year, and the tone of the album, the tone is very much like, oh, I'm going into the woods to retreat to my cabin. It just felt very, I forget, like privileged and middle class. The entire album, and it just
the use of the word ghost
really,
that Fran referred to earlier really sat uncomfortably with me.
I can see where she was going, like the story she was trying to paint in that particular song of like, oh, there's this person that was overlooked, and then she's using oldie timey stuff to describe
Jane
her,
Austen,
but
right?
then she's like, I'm living here now and I can appreciate her story. But it's just like, if that's the biggest thing going in your world right now, and as someone who is such a big voice, and she's this album, I think if this was just another one of her pop albums, I wouldn't give a shit, because I wouldn't give a shit about the album. But the fact that she's angling towards being this more critically acclaimed, broader based, and she's growing her political voice at the same time, and she has huge influence. It just feels like disappointing. Not that exciting.
It's funny how much she wants to be the Phoebe Bridgers. Do you not think? It was
I write that down for the Phoebe Bridgers album. Is Punisher is the album that she wants to make and she didn't.
But this is what I think is interesting, and it's kind of tied into another thing I thought as well, is that, I like this album. Like, I think I like it. I can't tell yet, but I think if someone else had released this album this year, if it wasn't a Taylor Swift album, when I look at the people who are going mad about it, and you see people who are like, regularly, big national fans, that kind of thing, going mad about this album, I think if anybody else had released it, it wouldn't have made any waves. It would certainly not be getting 8 number ones across. I wrote down the type of places that have put it as number one, sort of Billboard and all sorts of big publications. If anybody else had released this, even if it was an Aaron Dessner produced album that got some attention, like there's an album by a singer called Hannah Georgias that came out this year that he produced, and it's fucking beautiful, it's stunning, but it's not got any acclaim. It's a much better album than this. If anyone else had released it, I don't think it would have done anything like what it has done this year. And I think that says something, doesn't it, about the quality of it? Does it? But do I love it? I don't know.
Useless.
Well, I think you're gonna like it because of the type of album it is, but it doesn't mean it's one of the best albums.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm glad I heard it. I'm glad I spent some time listening to it.
Have you listened to the follow-up yet?
No, I haven't. No, I was waiting to form my opinion on this one, which obviously I still haven't done. So I don't know if I'll ever listen to Evermore, because I know National feature on that one, and that's just going to fucking confuse me even more, isn't it? So I don't know what to say.
Yeah. I feel bad being harsh because she's in a tough spot, but also she's now has the power to do whatever she wants. She could ignore everyone and do.
Yeah. I mean, whether you like them or not, she could do a Beatles and just do something that was radically different from what she did in the first place, and reinvent herself.
I think it's what you were saying a little bit, Nick, though. That bit's about pandering to it. If she took some of the stuff out of this album, if there was just songs like Mirrorball and This Is Me Trying and stuff, it would be a really beautiful album. If it had those songs that don't have that sort of, oh, I'm a 17-year-old still, please like me element to it, then it would be really good. So she could do that, and she could come. I think she could come out with something on the basis of this album. I think she could come out with something really, really good. But I just don't think this is quite that album yet.
She no doubt has a lot of talent, but even like working within restrictions, right? You see the Chloe and Halle album, right? One of them's going to be the new Ariel in the Little Mermaid movie. They're in like also acting in TV shows, they have restrictions to their image, but they're still ignoring that and writing songs about getting drunk and having fun and stuff like that. And that is something that often is looked down upon for young women, especially in their like 20s, low 20s. So you just gotta, you can do it, right? Like she could do it.
She's under a mountain of pressure, I'm sure. I mean, to be sympathetic to her, she's under a mountain of pressure from all directions to do something that's going to again carry the music industry through another year, kind of thing. You know, like that's what volume we're talking about, isn't it? With her,
and I think it was a big thing for her to even do this much. I think to like do the album with Aaron Dessner and do, you know, I think it was a big thing.
It's not gone far enough, maybe. Almost certainly.
But it's you know, I would end by saying I think it's kind of it is a positive step, and I do want to say I do commend that she was able to sort of do that, even though I still don't know what I think about it. But okay, cool. That's all of the albums. So we're going to try and name a Picky Bastards podcast album of.
I think something crazy is going to happen from thinking about. Go ahead, we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Well, I think I know what it's going to be, and it's going to upset me. But so I'm gonna so I can add up as we go. I'll tell you my top 3 first. Actually, I won't because I don't know. But in third place, I've got either Taylor Swift or Chloe and Halle. I think that conversation has just persuaded me that my third place is Chloe and Halle. So that is my third place.
Okay.
My second place is Open Mike Eagle, and my first place is obviously Phoebe Bridgers. Matt, what's third?
So my second and third is between Kelly Chris and Open Mike Eagle. I think I'm going to put Kelly Chris in third, Open Mike Eagle in second.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it was the other way around.
Oh.
And then obviously Car Seat Headrest is top. And
Nick?
I'm going to go third. I'm going to go with Poppy.
Wow.
Second, Fleet Foxes. And first, obviously, Quelle.
Fleet Foxes second. Jesus fucking Christ.
It was not my second favourite album. It's the second favourite on this list.
I know.
Yeah, just to be clear.
Okay, so I'll just do some quick maths. But you two, while I do some quick maths.
Isn't it just a tie between Open Mike Eagle and Kelly Chris?
He can do the maths in his head. He's a scientist.
So, yes, it is. It is.
That's perfect since they're very different styles of a similar genre.
Because it's a tie between those two.
Oh, here we go.
But then if we add up the points, the highest scored points that they got, I think Open Mike Eagle is the eventual winner because two of us gave it 2 points. So that's 4 points, and Nick only gave it 3 points. So on a technicality,
on a total bullshit technicality, on a totally contrived load of shit.
Yeah, I did just totally make that up as I was going. But, well, there you go.
There we go then.
Eagle.
Cool.
So no, it's not Open Mike Eagle. It's joint.
I'm happy with both of those as my joint second and third.
Open Mike Eagle.
They were going to be joint second if I could.
Okay.
So frustrating.
What did you guys think of the list as a whole, Nick?
I thought it was a good list. There was not much on it that I wanted to get past as quickly as possible. Only occasional tracks. You know, there weren't whole albums I wanted to get past as quickly as possible, except for the Cornershop, really. And so, Open Mike Eagle as well. But I mean, I did listen to it
some more time,
a fair few times. Whereas Cornershop was just was really unbearable, painful, literally. I think overall it was a pretty solid list. And my opinion of Car Seat Headrest, Taylor Swift, Phoebe Bridgers, and Fleet Foxes were all better than I was expecting.
Okay.
You know, I didn't have high expectations, and they all improved. And
That's
Poppy,
good.
I suppose you could say.
Yeah.
Because I had no opinion.
Matt?
I kind of similar. Like I don't think anything on this. We listened to a lot of the really good music from this year already, and so that rules it out of it featuring in this episode. So that made it hard because I don't think anything was really contending for the number one spot for me. Like a surprise push out of Car Seat Headrest, but. Broadly, the list as a whole, it was better than our normal episode because there's a lot of really good albums. The only ones I didn't really like were Fleet Foxes and Cornershop. And like Nick said, everyone who I had preconceptions about bettered them. Even Taylor Swift, like I was harsh on it, but I thought it was a lot more listenable and enjoyable than I was
I thought it was
kind of
going to be
expecting
really,
it to
really
be.
bad, and it was just bad
Yeah.
for you.
Well, no, I still think like I wouldn't if someone put this on and I was around their house, I wouldn't be like, oh, it's a fine album. I just was reflecting on it. I was hoping for more, but
Right.
also it's much better than what I've heard in the past.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, for me, I thought this was. I was looking back at some of the album of the year lists we've done before on the podcast. I think this is our fourth now. This was the best one for me. There was nothing on there that I hated at all. I thought everything was at least decent. And then with the Open Mike Eagle album, actually, that's one that would have, if I'd heard it earlier, it would have got up there into my sort of top 5 or 6 of the year, I think. So that's what I hope to get from these kind of lists. And then it's a lot of enjoyment out of albums like Chloe and Halle and you know the Taylor Swift. I listened to it a lot, so I must have liked it in some respects. So I think good list. I was pleased with it. Even the ones that like you say Poppy and Cornershop, those took me by surprise. I didn't expect to get much from them at all, and I did. So yeah, good list.
And we're with a joint winner as well, which means one that
Open Mike Eagle winning it is fantastic.
Yeah, and the joint winner is a fantastic thing where Matt is in between the two choices, and Fran and I are on the definite divergent on the two sides of it.
Yeah,
which sums up this podcast, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah,
that means I just have the most right opinion.
Yeah, sort of wrong both ways or right both ways, I suppose. Yeah, you could say.
Yeah,
I mean, the thing is, I very nearly, if it hadn't been Taylor Swift or Chloe and Halle, I would have put Seat Headrest in third, and then they would have been joint as well. So,
Wow,
that would have been heady days.
exciting times.
Right, so that's the end of 2020. Let's talk about what's happening next month in our 39th episode.
Yeah.
I have chosen an album from actually 2020, so it's not quite the end of 2020. I've chosen Girlhood's Girlhood, and then I've chosen an album that came out on New Year's Day this year, which is Bob's Son by R.A.P. Ferreira and Scallops Hotel.
Cool. And I also, it's a 2020 album, but it came out right at the end of 2020, is Avalanches and We Will Always Love You. And I also, one that just came out, Viagra Boys with Jazz Welfare.
And I will be hosting. That means I do the classic, which will be Deep Purple's Machine Head. And then I'll be doing a playlist about why I love Hendrix, which I'm very, very excited about. In fact, I've almost written all my notes a month early for it.
Really?
So, I've almost got to like
So you
2
don't want
pages
to
of
listen
notes.
to the playlist and see if you change your mind?
You never know. I might go off it in that
like
time. So I'll be doing Hendrix. It'll be fantastic. Everyone get excited.
Cool.
Okay, as well.
I'm excited. I'm jazzed.
Jazzed.
All right.
Right.
So
Till next
go
time.
to the site.
Oh yeah, go
Do
to
all
the
that
site,
stuff,
pickybees.com. Follow us on Twitter at pickybastards, capital P, capital B, all those other things.
Okay, that was very thorough. Thank you. All right, we're all done.
Happy New Year, guys.
Yes. See you
Bye.
soon. Bye.
See ya.